I think tonight's a great night for us all to get together. And while we're very concerned about the cost to American taxpayers and the fact that we'd be going away from our fossil fuels, which are so abundant, so accessible, and so affordable, there's another issue that takes place at the same time. In the Paris Protocol, we've heard the President say very clearly, and he's used this many times before, that things aren't getting done at the pace that he would like, and that he has a phone and he has a pen, and that if Congress can't act, he will act. Well, I would like to suggest to the President, in fact, it's kind of shocking and stunning that a former professor of constitutional law would have a total disregard for the Constitution. I'd like to tell the President that the Constitution is not a suggestion. It is who we are. It is what makes us an exceptional nation. Now, the United Nations framework for Convention on Climate Control is taking place right now, as I said, in Paris. It is stunning that the legacy of one man would overshadow what's good for not only our country but the world. Decisions made by this President, commitments made by this President, and he looks at it as an executive decision, not as a treaty that requires him returning to the House and to the Senate, and particularly treating this as a treaty where it would take 2/3 of the Senate to concur with whatever it is that we're proposing. And again, as I said, this is a former professor of constitutional law. And yet he continually defies that. He makes the House irrelevant. This is not, by the way, a Republican or Democrat issue. This is an American issue. This goes to the very framework and the foundation of who we are as a nation. So when you look at this, it's really hard to believe that there's such disregard. And I would just say to the President, if you go to Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2, it's very clearly stated. The President shall have power by and with the advice and consent to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur. Again, an overreach by an executive. And it doesn't matter if it's a Republican sitting in the White House or a Democrat sitting in the White House or an independent or a libertarian sitting in the White House. It clearly is defined in our Constitution how these powers work. Yes, I will.
Mr. Speaker, if one would ask a question of some high school students in a civics class, if you have an agreement, let's say, between 2 countries or 3 countries or 4 countries, and those countries are agreeing to do things that are going to bind their respective citizens, you would ask those students, I would think, Mr. Speaker, what would you call that type of agreement? I think every one of those students in a civics class might say a treaty. And if it's a treaty, if it looks like a treaty, if it smells like a treaty, it works like a treaty, it's a treaty. And to just highlight what my colleague here has been saying, we have a process in our Constitution for when it's a treaty. It needs to get submitted to the Senate with a 2/3 vote. I yield back.
And I thank the gentleman for his contribution. But, I mean, it really does come down to, well, tonight we're talking about energy, and we're talking about setting targets and timetables that will be very expensive for hardworking American taxpayers' money. And I would like to remind the President that the money that he's talking about committing is not his. It belongs to hardworking American taxpayers. This insane idea that somehow there is an endless amount of money to be thrown around the world for whatever reason possible, and knowing that really the Paris Protocol is nothing more than a conversation taking place in Paris. There's no commitment from these countries to do all these things. There is an ask for these countries to do these things, and what they're asking is, if we do comply with these suggestions, these targets, these timetables, will we be subsidized by the United States of America? The President has been unbelievable to make the commitments that he continues to make. He does not have that power. Our Constitution clearly defines the separation of powers. It's clearly structured so that no one body can run roughshod over the other body. This has been a concern forever. And yet this president consistently, time after time, disregards the House and the Senate. And as I said earlier, this is not about Republicans or Democrats. This is about America and America's future. In this case, it's about energy. But as we go forward, what other overreaches will this executive take? What other things will he do? Because it's about his legacy and not about the well-being of our country and our people. It is shocking, it is stunning that he would continue on this path. And what is even more stunning to me is that the American people sit idly and watch this happen day after day, week after week, month after month. In 7 years of watching this, and sit back and say, I'm not sure that he doesn't have the power to do this. Well, let me tell you, it is clearly defined in our Constitution that this president does not have this authority. In fact, no president, no executive has the authority to do what this president is continuing to do. So as we meet here in America's House, and we look at what can you do, because people back home tell me all the time, look, I agree with you, but what can you do about it? And I know that for myself and my colleagues, we refuse to sit by idly and watch our nation be given away, and watch our Constitution be run roughshod over because of one man's legacy. This is not what's good for America. This is what's good for this administration and this president. That is not only shameful, it is unconstitutional and cannot be tolerated. That is why, with Senator Lee in the Senate and myself, we've come up with concurrent resolution 97 that states any commitment of funds, hard-working American taxpayer funds, has got to come before the Senate for its advice and consent. As I said earlier, we can debate and we can talk and we can amend, but what we cannot condone is an executive who has a total disregard for this House and for the Senate. As I said earlier, we need colleagues on both sides. This is not a Republican issue or a Democrat issue. This comes down to the very foundation of who we are as a country. If we turn our back on this, what will be next? The continual disregard for the Constitution is of grave concern, not only to me, to my colleagues, but every single American, regardless of how you vote or how you register. That is not the issue, my friends. The issue is, when do the American people in America's House with the Senate stand up and say there will be no commitment of hardworking American taxpayer dollars unless it comes before the Senate as a treaty and gets the advice of the consent of the Senate, 2/3 of which are required to pass this. So I know we're coming to an end in Paris, and I know there's great concern of getting to Paris to find out exactly what the Paris Protocol is structured with. But I would just say this: before you pack your bag, take a copy of your Constitution with you. And for those folks sitting back home and watching this happen, please get out your Constitutions and look. And for our schools, please start to preach and teach the Constitution.